Hello and welcome to episode 10 of the MyBettingMate Kick-Off Podcast, your MyBettingMates podcast for all things Premier League and A-League. I'm joined once again by Nick Dabano. Thanks for coming along, Nick.
No, great to be back.
Yeah, we're back in the studio this week, so another week full of A-League and Premier League chat. And I guess we'll start where we always start, which is with the A-League. Another action-packed weekend just passed, but we're looking a bit more forward this week. We've got a big Sydney derby coming up on the weekend, a game that rarely disappoints. It does let us down every now and then, but more often than not, it's a good game. What have you sort of taken looking at that game this week?
It's an interesting one because it is obviously, as you mentioned, one of the biggest fixtures on the A-League calendar every single year. This is the second one of the year. We had the first one at Allianz Stadium, which the Wanderers won 1-0. It's been a weird one in the last season and a half because none of the home sides have won. It's always been the away side that's come away with the win. They played each other 4 times last year, and each time, when it was at Allianz, Western Sydney Wanderers won, and each time it was at CommBank, and of course that all-important elimination final, Sydney FC won as well. So you're looking at form, you're looking at current trajectory, and you go, well, history looks like it's going to repeat itself again because Sydney FC, at CommBank have actually been able to come away with the win and with the wins. And they've been in some really good form as of late. 6 games unbeaten coming into this contest. But their opponents, the Wanderers, they did get a much-needed win against Adelaide last week. They were in a bit of a rough patch, a few off-field distractions. They've got their coach, Marco Rudan, back from suspension this week, so you can imagine there'll be a few fireworks in the lead-up and potentially pitch side as well. We know that him and Steve Corica, the former Sydney FC coach, had a few comings-togethers last year. There was the added narrative of Milos Ninkovic as well. Crossing the derby divide. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens this Saturday because you do get a sense the Wanderers fans are going to come out for this one. They know how important it is, and even as well for the Sydney FC fans because these two sides are inside the top 6, but not firmly entrenched. There's still that trapdoor that if they do drop points with some of the teams just waiting around in the wings, that they could potentially fall closer to that trapdoor and drop out of the top 6, while a win, though, goes a long way to locking in a top 6 spot.
Yeah, it's always a high stakes game, but certainly does feel like there's that jeopardy around the finals at the moment. Both teams, 6th and 5th respectively. Sydney FC, a vastly different side, I think, now to when they played last. I think it's a weird one. We've seen a lot of the big games sort of 2 or 3 times already this season in the A-League, and we've had to wait a while for the second Sydney derby. So I feel like Sydney have been much better off for that time in between the games. How do you see, I guess, Sydney FC approaching the game tactically? Do you think they'll try and survive the environment and the atmosphere at Western Sydney, or do you think Tale is going to go for the throat early?
It's an interesting one because what they've done really well in this last little bit has been their pressing work. I mean, they've had a few injuries and that's sort of tinkered their defensive unit a little bit. Some players have come in and actually really stood up, especially some of the youngsters like Hayden Matthews and Corey Holman. Jordan Courtney-Perkins has been some really good form at left back as well. So they've been able to find some consistency in that. But I think they will be looking to try and get themselves on the front foot early. I think weathering that early storm as well will be so important because we know the Wanderers players will be up for this and they'll be really looking to try, conversely, to make a statement and put Sydney FC on the back foot. Something Sydney have done really well has been, getting the lead in games and holding on to that as well. Against Melbourne City, though, last week, they were sort of undone by one really good counter-attack where, Jamie Young just goes for the old-fashioned kick it long to Marco Tilio, and it's a bit of individual brilliance that, gets Melbourne City a point. But Sydney have been good at, getting results this season. And I do get a sense that if they can weather... So as much as they will go for the throat, but weathering the early emotion of the game, because you do get a sense that both teams are going to want to put a few challenges in, let them know you're there. There's going to be a bit of spice. We saw it last year when they played each other in the final that the Wanderers kept them in the game when they were up 1-0 and Sydney came out and really got them late and were able to come away with that win. Yes, the teams have changed a bit since then, but I do get a sense that, the further that they stay in this game, the better it will work for them. So I think when you're looking at it from a Wanderers perspective, I think they'd be hoping to kill the game off early and not sort of keep it sort of level or a goal ahead. They won't be wanting to put their foot down early as well.
Yeah, it will be certainly an interesting game to watch. We'll get to our tips in that part of the show. But the other I guess talking point for our column this week was looking at Melbourne City, a team that we've just become accustomed to, I guess, since the City Football Group got involved with them. They're just a consistent finals contender. They're always going to be there or thereabouts. And they're really facing a tough moment now where, for the first time in I think it's a decade that they might not be playing finals. It's crazy for me as someone who used to go to a lot of Melbourne Heart games to think that that's the same club that now hasn't missed finals for 10 years. But it's sort of do or die now for Melbourne City as every week sort of goes past.
Yeah, every game becomes all the more important for them. I mean, that last time that they did, as you mentioned, the last time they did actually miss the finals was when they weren't even called Melbourne City. It was actually their last year's Melbourne Heart before the CFG takeover. And since then, they have been a consistent final staple. For a lot of that period, they were perennial bridesmaids, semi-final finish, runners-up in 2020. But then since then, they've won 3 straight premierships. They've won a championship in that period. But, of course, they've lost the last 2 grand finals. So we've been so accustomed to them being there in the nitty-gritty right at the end. They've played in 4 successive grand finals. So this is a critical juncture for them. It's been a fascinating year because they've had a bit of turmoil off the field. I mean, changing coaches after 2 games into the season with Rado Vidicic departing, Aurelio Vidmar coming in. After the grand final last year, a heap of their good players, went off to Europe. You look at Geordie Boss. Of course, Marco Tilio's come back now, but he's signed for Celtic. Aidan O'Neill, Tom Glover, the list goes on of players that they lost. So they had to really regenerate the squad again. Injuries at the start of the year. When you lose Matthew Leckie, who got injured on international duty, then did his hamstring in the Champions League. Andrew Naboo got injured. Jamie McLaren was battling through a toe injury. So they've really had a lot of upheaval. And even Tolgay Arslan, one of the best, probably one of the best players in the league, getting injured, then getting suspended. It all adds up. So they have faced a lot. They've played a lot of games in quick succession. I think it did start to catch up a little bit when the injuries started coming. And when you felt like they were about to kick on, they'd face a new roadblock. And now it's really getting to that point where they have to start getting points. After that 5-1 loss against Brisbane Roar, they've since steadied the ship a little bit. A 0-0 draw in the Melbourne Derby, a 1-1 draw against Sydney FC. I think especially in the Melbourne Derby, they would have felt a bit aggrieved not to get more from that game because they did hit the woodwork twice. So I think now, considering they're starting to get players back, Tolgay Arslan's back, Matthew Leckie's back, Andrew Naboo's back, Jamie McLaren hasn't been in form as of late, but he's a player that can turn it on just like that. They don't really have the excuses anymore because now they're playing with a week in between each game. The fixtures, the heavy toll of fixtures has died off. And I do think cream always does rise to the top. And I think that, with a team like Melbourne City, I think especially when you look at all the quality that they've got, you just expect that they're going to finish this season strongly. And I think they're going to have that second win in them, and starts this week with a big game against Macarthur, which I wouldn't say it's must win, but they've got to get something from this game. Because if they win, and say, Sydney FC beat the Western Sydney Wanderers, they're right back in the hunt. And even beating Macarthur, they're suddenly right back in the hunt as well to potentially get them too.
Yep. Well, we may as well start looking at the game, starting with Macarthur taking on Melbourne City. It's an important fixture, as we've spoken about, for Melbourne City. And like you say, with all these key players sort of coming back into fitness and hopefully into form, I feel you do feel like those excuses are sort of running out now. Do you think can they overcome the travel and get the win?
It's going to be a tough one because conversely, Macarthur have also played a lot of football recently, but Macarthur have shown great resilience to still get points even when the games have been coming thick and fast. Because when you look at Macarthur, everyone's kind of been expecting them to drop off at some point and start to, with all the AFC Cup games, and the toll of the travel. I think a lot of people were thinking the dip has to come, but they keep finding a way to get results. Even when they're losing games, they're still getting draws, which I think is all very, very important when it's all said and done. But I do think that Melbourne City are going to give them a stern test. They played a really entertaining 3-3 draw early in the year at Amy Park, and I think we're going to get another draw at Campbelltown Stadium. I think it's going to be a really entertaining contest because one thing we've seen with Macarthur this year is they're the kings of playing these chaotic games. It seems like when they play in the AFC Cup or they play in the league, we've seen some absolute crackers this season, and I think we might get another this Friday night. Yeah,
I've gone Melbourne City win here. I do think that they're going to start finding their form now that there's really no chance for them to sort of keep making up all these points that they're dropping. I think they'll turn the corner starting this week. Western United taking on Perth Glory, the next game to look at. I guess two teams that haven't had the best years. Perth Glory certainly turned that corner. Western United just still can't seem to get the consistent results that they need to pull themselves off the bottom of the ladder. And, they're 5 points off Adelaide United to a second bottom. So quite a bit of a distance for them to make up. Not that there's too much punishment for finishing last other than some Australia Cup repercussions. But, can Western United get the win at home?
Well, this is a big game. I think Western United have shown in the last week or so that they have found some resilience, and I think they've actually improved. Like, you look at the last 2 games, they've dropped points in the most heartbreaking of circumstances, leading by a goal against Melbourne Victory heading into stoppage time, concede 2 late goals and lose the game. Against Brisbane Roar, we're ahead 2-1 on the road, conceding in second half stoppage time again to drop 2 points. This is a game that I think they go in with a bit of confidence to get a result, because I know that Perth Glory have the form on their side, but away from home they have had struggles over the journey. They only really broke that hoodoo last month. Yeah, this is going to be, I think, it's going to be one of those games where I can expect a lot of chaos. I think Western United, they have nothing to lose at the moment. Finals is basically at the door. I mean, they have to double their points tally for the entire year and some just to even make up the gap to Sydney FC. Well, the one thing that does work in Western United's favour is Perth Glory's road form has been a bit hit and miss over the journey. I mean, they broke that hoodoo with a win against the Wanderers last month. They played a thrilling draw against Adelaide United a few weeks ago, but their best form has been at home this season. Playing against a Western United team that do have nothing to lose. They've really embraced playing the kids, young Matt Grimaldi, Charbel Shamoun, Kota Kador. The list goes on of players that have come through the NPL Academy now and are starting to get some minutes now playing for the senior team due to injuries and everything opening up. I think that it's been a good sign, because it shows that there is a future there at Western United from a playing perspective, that they can really kick on and potentially look ahead to next season. But I think we're going to get a draw in this game. I think if this was at HBF Park, I'd be backing a Glory win. Yep. But I think Western United are going to get something from this game, looking at the form and the way that they've sort of turned the corner recently as well.
Yeah, I've gone a draw too, only because I think Western United concede too many goals to win a lot of games. And Perth have shown a knack for scoring goals this year. So I think they can maybe match the goal tally, but I'm going for a draw. If I had to pick a winner, I'd probably lean Perth, to be honest, but I'll tip a draw as well there. Newcastle taking on Central Coast Mariners. I mean, form would suggest there's only one winner here. Newcastle without a win in their last 5 league games, and Central Coast with just the one loss from their most recent 6. How do you sort of see this one going?
Well, the Jets are the plucky underdogs who have been in and around games, but just not getting the wins. They've been getting a lot of draws this season. It's been a tough year for them. It's been a tough few years now for the Jets, but I think they've done. I don't want to say they've done the best with what they can, but they're always facing an uphill battle with the off-field circumstances around them, and they're taking on a team that are red hot at the moment. Yep. The Mariners right now are playing on a different level. They are probably alongside Wellington. They are the 2 form teams. There's a reason why they are the top 2 teams right now. They showed great sort of innovation on the weekend to change system against Melbourne Victory after that short turnaround from the MacArthur game. Play a little bit more conservative, but come away with what was a very, very important win. Now, going on the road again against Newcastle, it's an F3 derby. There's a lot riding on this game. You expect there's going to be a good travelling contingent of Mariners fans coming down the highway. I think it all sets up for a very, very good Central Coast win. I think that they've now had a full week to recover coming into that game against the Jets side that have been hit and miss this year. Yes, Apostolos Stamatolopoulos has been sensational and he's now top of the Golden Boot tally. But I do think that the Mariners are just going to be that bit too strong for him.
Yeah, hard for me to tip against Central Coast in this one. There is always the derby aspect, I guess, where unexpected things can happen. But if you're tipping with your head, I think it's hard to go against Central Coast there. The other derby, obviously, we've touched on quite a bit already this week. Western Sydney are hosting Sydney FC. I guess we don't need to go into too much detail. We've already sort of spoken about it. But how do you see this game going from a results point of view?
Well, I know that we've had winners every single time in the last 5 meetings or so, but I actually think that this is where it ends. I think we get a draw at CommBank Stadium. I think that these 2 teams are going to throw everything at each other and it's going to be a real tight affair. I think I'm expecting fireworks. I think that's my big prediction from this game. I'm expecting a very physical game, a lot of cards, but I do think this game is going to end in a stalemate. I just can't split them.
Yeah. I've gone a Sydney FC win there. I just think they're in the better form. Wanderers a bit unpredictable. You're probably right on the fireworks aspect, but Yeah, we typically get winners from these games, as you've mentioned. So I've gone Sydney FC there. Wellington taking on Adelaide United. And again, I find it hard to see past Wellington, especially at home here. Is there any reason maybe that Adelaide can upset me here?
I mean, like when you think about if Adelaide put together that form that we've seen in previous years, sure, they could get something from this game, but Wellington have been so good at home.
Yeah.
Adelaide have just been in a bit of free fall at the moment is probably the best way to sum it up, is that it hasn't really felt like in the last few weeks that they've been able to really resuscitate that fall. And it is really disappointing considering where Adelaide have been and the project that they've got there with all the young kids that they've got coming through and everything like that. But this is going to be so tough for them, playing against a team that are just so hard to beat at the moment, a team that get results. It might not be the most pretty all the time, but they get results. And that's the reason why they're top, whether it's draws. They just don't lose. Like, they haven't lost, I think, now in 9 straight games. And I think that does continue, and Wellington will win this game to make it 10 games unbeaten.
Yep, Wellington for me there as well. And the round finishes off with Brisbane Roar taking on Melbourne Victory in Brisbane. I don't have particularly high hopes for this game personally. Victory have been so dour the last couple of weeks. They were unlucky last week. I don't like to make a point about refereeing, and I think it more often than not it sort of balances out over the season. But there were some very questionable calls in that last loss against Central Coast Mariners. So you don't sort of account for that to happen too often, or again, in consecutive weeks. But Victory have just. I'm tipping a draw here mainly because Victory is involved. To be honest, I just think they'll etch out a draw. But how do you see this one going?
If there's any game for Victory to turn around their attacking woes, it's this one. I mean, Brisbane have the leakiest defence in the league with 42 goals conceded. So I think if you're the Melbourne Victory attack and you're looking for a game to find some form again, if you're someone like Bruno Fornaroli looking to end that goal drought, this is the kind of game to do it. They haven't played each other yet this season, so it's, I think, a first-time meeting, of course. So heading up to Suncorp, I mean, yes, that does lean in Brisbane Roar's favour. Yes, Brisbane need to win this game to stay in any sort of chance to play finals football. But I just think that Melbourne Victory are going to come away with a win. They're going to eke a result from this game and keep themselves in contention for a top 2 finish.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, that wraps up the A-League chat for the week. We'll head across the pond and talk some Premier League. Obviously, we're in the middle of a midweek FA Cup round, so games are coming thick and fast for a lot of different teams, whether they're at the pointy end of the table or mid-table or down the bottom. But for the column this week, we really had a look at Chelsea, and I guess the missed opportunity that they had at the weekend pass to hopefully pick up some silverware against Liverpool. Couldn't overcome quite a young Liverpool team. Chelsea coming in for quite a bit of criticism. I think Gary Neville called them blue billion bottle jobs or something like that, which Pochettino didn't take too kindly to. He felt like that was a bit unfair on how young his own side was, which, I'm not sure it was, Liverpool definitely finished the game with, a few more teenagers on the ground than Chelsea did. But in a season where they've really struggled for form in the league, this was a real missed opportunity for them to at least have some cadence of a highlight, for Poch to sort of maybe hang his hat on and say, look, didn't go that well this year, but, there was some silverware for us to celebrate. Yeah. Where does that sort of leave them, do you think, for the rest of the year?
It's a weird one because they're in mid-table purgatory, which is such a weird sort of scenario to be in if you're a Chelsea supporter, if you're involved at the Chelsea Football Club, considering this is a team who's used to success. I mean, what was it? It was only just under 3 years ago they won the UEFA Champions League. Like, that is the level of Chelsea that we've become accustomed to for quite some time. I think that was a big missed opportunity on the weekend. I mean, considering all the players Liverpool had out, the chances that they were creating in that game as well, that they didn't score is unbelievable. But it kind of comes back to their attacking issues they've had all season, not being able to find an answer up front, whether it's been Nicholas Jackson. I know Nkuku's had his fitness concerns, but they have spent so much money to get, all these new players in, all these young guns, literally just, picking players from everywhere. And, you'd think that eventually it's going to bear some fruit, but just never has. We've seen some positive results, then they'll play a game against the team they should beat, then they don't. it's a season fast slipping away. I don't know where they go from here because I think it's obviously a little bit too late for them to catch the top four. But I think, all they can do right now is just look at the league and just go, well, what can we achieve? And that's just trying to get as high up the table as possible because unfortunately for Mauricio Pochettino, now he's under even more pressure to try and get something from this season. Going into it, it was about him being the saviour and resuscitate Chelsea. But right now, we're heading into the second year of the new ownership, and nothing's really changed, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's a tough climb. I mean, obviously, I think most of this season will now be written off as one of development and looking to get it right for the years to come. Whether Pochettino's done enough for the hierarchy at Chelsea to entrust him with that next phase of the development. But I mean, like you mentioned, it's almost like a football manager squad. They've just gone out and splash the cash on as many promising young players as possible and just hope that it would stick eventually or come together. And I'm not sure that they're any closer to achieving the level that they really want to hit now than they were at the start of the year. So, certainly a work in progress. I guess the big question now is whether Poch has done enough in the eyes of the hierarchy to deserve the opportunity to, I guess, take that rebuild forward. The other, I guess, interesting game from the weekend was Arsenal versus Newcastle. I think we spoke a little bit about this last week in the Around the Ground section as a game that Arsenal really had to win to prove that they deserve to remain in the title discussion against the Newcastle team that I think people continue to expect more of, but probably don't deliver the performances that justify that expectation. But they certainly put them to bed, in a pretty good performance. And I think in the column this week we sort of had a quick look at their set piece mastery and how they've really turned corners and other set pieces into a real asset for them this year.
Yeah, absolutely. They've been brilliant off set pieces now for the last couple of years since they brought a set piece coach in and been able to, use that as a weapon. We know that in football, like if you can make the most of set pieces, I know it's not a very flashy way of scoring goals, but at the end of the day, goals are goals.
Yeah.
If it gets you results, it gets you results. And I think for a team that's starved of success, especially in the league, for Arsenal fans, they won't be complaining. Look, something like 15 goals now in 3 games. Like, that's a really good run for them. They've kept themselves firmly in contention for the Premier League title, and considering Liverpool and Man City play each other in a few weeks, this is the time now. Like, they have to make sure they keep getting these results on the board because those two teams cancel each other out. Liverpool, if their injuries and heavy fixture load eventually takes a toll on them, that's an opening. I mean, Man City keep finding a way to get results. I think that's the, sort of the one thing that we've seen over the years. Man City just keep finding a way to find another gear at this point in the season and are so consistent. But Arsenal need to try and keep pace. Last season, they fell off around this point, and then we saw what happened. Man City were able to waltz to the title.
Yeah.
So I do think that this is a very crucial juncture in Arsenal's season. They're teetering in the Champions League right now, and you do wonder, like, there is that kind of argument of if we go out here, maybe it'd actually be better for our chances in the league because, then we can focus just on one competition, keep bodies fresh, don't have to play as much football as some of our competitors.
Yeah, I mean they won't throw a Champions League tie, but I think it would be it would definitely maybe help their aspirations in the league if they didn't have to contend with midweek football.
Lining.
Yeah, a bit of a silver lining, and I still think they're probably going to rue that little dip that they had in that festive period, and I think that's going to cost them ultimately. But I think for the league's sake, it's really important to have a genuine third contender in there. It's really been a bit of a a two-horse race for much of the last 5 years. So I think Arsenal really throwing their weight around and adding some excitement to the last couple of weeks outside of Liverpool and Man City. It's just good for the neutral, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we haven't had too many title races that come down to the final day. I mean, ever since 2012, we've only had a couple that have, but it's always felt like a formality of what's coming next.
That's
we had the tease in 2022 when Villa were up against Man City, but it still felt like, okay, they're going to come back. They're going to win. Yeah. We don't have the relegation battle of seasons prior where, we used to have all the teams potentially, in with a chance to survive around the final day. Right now, we have, Burnley and Sheffield United basically already down, and we have one team battling to stay up, which is Luton against, your likes of Everton, Nottingham, Brentford. So I think that if we've got something at the top end of the table where we actually have 3 teams involved and every game has that little bit of extra weight, it'll be fantastic. But you mentioned Newcastle, Matt. I mean, There's concerns.
Yeah.
There are injuries. You know, the Sandro Tonali suspension has really hurt them. I think, like, considering how much money they spent on him to come in and him being out for the season, it's a massive out for him. You know, so I think that there probably can be a little bit of, you know, okay, we've had a few different struggles. We've had to play Champions League football early in the season, but considering after finishing 4th last year, to not have any European football next year, if they finish outside the Europa League and Conference League places as well, and not winning any silverware as well, I think that's a real disappointment. Look, they won this morning in the FA Cup, so they might still be able to get something from there. But, you know, they're in a bit of a tough position right now, considering that they're starting to lose pace with those sides like your Villas, even Manchester United, Tottenham, Brighton's now ahead of them on the standings, West Ham. So it's going to be a bit of an uphill battle now for them in heading into the rest of the season.
Yeah, I mean, we spoke about questions over Pochettino and whether he's earned the trust to see this project forward. I think, you know, serious concerns for Eddie Howe and whether he's given the nod to see this project through, because there's obviously a lot of wealth behind the club now and a lot of ambition. And, you know, I don't think a mid-table finish is really up to scratch for Newcastle as much as it is for Chelsea. So it will certainly be an interesting, I guess, storyline to follow for the rest of the year. We'll just quickly look at the Week 27 games in the Premier League. So kicks off with Brentford taking on Chelsea. Obviously, we've spoken a bit about Chelsea today. Brentford, you know, if they're going to win this game, it's probably the home game that they're more likely to win. Not actually that much difference in terms of the form between the two sides over the last couple of weeks. Obviously, Chelsea have played a few more games. But, how do you see this game sort of panning?
I think we're going towards draw. I just don't think that either side, you know, right now has been convincing. I think, you know, obviously Brentford were given quite a battering on Tuesday by West Ham. They did, you know, make the scoreline look a little bit more respectable at the end, but West Ham were a vastly better team on Tuesday morning. Chelsea, I think that playing 120 minutes against Liverpool in what was such a tight, grueling contest and backing up with one of the first games of the weekend. I mean, it's very interesting fixturing to put these two on first, but I think this game is heading towards probably a score draw in what is essentially a London derby.
Yep. I think Chelsea might find the win here. But I don't think a draw is a terrible tip. But I'm going to tip Chelsea there. Burnley, Bournemouth, two sides sort of out of sorts. Burnley looking, you know, set for the relegation heap. Bournemouth maybe have done enough so far this season to remove themselves from that conversation, but they're really only a couple of bad results and, you know, other teams around them picking up points from being right back in that relegation discussion. How do you see this one going?
Well, Bournemouth were gallant in defeat last week against City, but taking on a team like Burnley, this is a game that they quite frankly have to win, as you mentioned, to try and keep a bit of a gap between them and Luton on the table. Just you want it. Obviously, it's the magic 40-point mark. They're at 28 points now, so 4 more wins you think would be enough to keep them up for another season. Burnley are desperate. I mean, they're now 11 points inside the drop. It's going to be very hard for Vincent Kompany's side to turn things around, but I do think Bournemouth are just going to be that little bit too strong. Despite losing against City, I think there's enough confidence considering they only lost by a goal against a very, very good side.
Yep. Everton taking on West Ham. Another interesting game. Everton obviously buoyed by the fact that their points deduction was reduced a little this week, so that gives them a bit more breathing space. I think the points deduction has sort of deceived, their actual quality versus where they are on the table. They've played some very entertaining games this year. And I think Everton-West Ham is a game that could threaten to, maybe explode into a bit of an entertaining affair, depending how West Ham approach it away from home. I'm going a draw here. How are you going here?
West Ham win. I think that win against Brentford has sparked them into some life. Everton, of course, as you mentioned, buoyed by the fact that they have got that, part of that points deduction taken off. But their form on the field hasn't been great. 4 draws in their last 5, though. Not terrible, but they're not winning games at the moment. I think West Ham getting, finally breaking that winless run and getting that result against Brentford was massive for them. They've still got European football in sight. So I think for them, they'll be too strong and they'll come away with a win here.
Yep. Fulham taking on Brighton. Again, two sides that have shown sort of mixed form. There's not a heap between them in the table over the course of the games so far this year. Fulham at home. I'm inclined to go with the home side here, but how are you tipping this one?
This is tough because Brighton have had so many injuries this year. They're higher than Fulham on the table. Going to go draw again in this one. Sorry to be boring, but I just don't see either side being able to kick ahead in this game. I think if Brighton were at full strength, they'd win this game. But, I think that at the moment, Fulham are in some okay form too. So I think that the fact that they're coming off that win against Manchester United, they got a bit of momentum heading back to Craven Cottage. I think we're going to see a very entertaining draw there.
Yep. And Luton are hosting Aston Villa. A game that, Aston Villa have obviously maintained their top four hopes. At one point they were sort of in the title discussion. I don't know how serious those predictions were, but they were close enough to merit at least being in the conversation. I don't see any reason other than, I guess, the away factor to tip against them at Luton, but I'm gonna tip them to win.
Yeah, I'm going Villa to win this game. Luton coming off a really big loss as well in the FA Cup against Manchester City. 3 straight losses in the league. Villa's won their last 2 games, and I think they're going to make it 3 straight.
Yep. Big Manchester derby.
Yeah.
Well, they're not as big as they used to be, I guess, anymore, unfortunately, for United fans like myself. But, United had built up a good head of momentum in terms of results. I don't think anyone would kid themselves and say that the performances were particularly inspiring, but they were finding ways to win games. I think to have lost at home to Fulham like they did last week really kills all of that momentum, which they really would have liked to have had heading into a derby. City obviously picked up a big FA Cup win. We're speaking before United take on Nottingham Forest in the morning. So that could be a chance, I guess, for United to rediscover some form. They might be resting players in preparation for this. United's real only chance of silverware is the FA Cup. So I doubt that they're going to go too easy there. As much as I want to, I can't find any reason to tip against City here.
No, completely agreed. I think City win this game in some great form at the moment in terms of, like, they were winning games. Yeah, it wasn't convincing, but I think that win against Luton, Haaland scoring 5 and that sort of momentum, I think that's a very scary prospect if you're, a Manchester United fan, considering if he finds form now and being at home, City, I think, are just going to be too strong in this game and they're going to come away with all 3 points.
Yep. Newcastle take on Wolves. We've touched on Newcastle. It's really probably not been good enough for a club of their expectation this year. Wolves, on the other hand, actually above them on the table, and in the better form. I think I'll go a draw just because it's at Newcastle. But where are you seeing this one going?
Yeah, same here. Draw. I think the fact, if this is at the Molineux, I'd be going more towards Wolves. But I think that Newcastle returning home, they're gonna get something from this game.
Yeah. Nottingham Forest taking on Liverpool. I mean, so I'm just looking at the injury list and it's absolutely massive, but it hasn't really stopped them from winning games this year. Nottingham Forest in peak survival mode, I guess. So there's always that desperation factor, but Liverpool just as desperate at the other end of the table. These are the games you need to win to be champions, isn't it?
Exactly right, and I think Liverpool are going to win again. I think they've got that momentum. The kids are all right. They're getting results. Hopefully, for their sake, they get some players back this week after a full week of rest. But I think, Liverpool are going to come away with 3 points in this game.
Yeah, awesome. And then Sheffield United taking on Arsenal. Bottom place Sheffield United. They haven't had a whole heap to sing about this year. They do have 1 win in their last 6 games, but Arsenal have been faultless. So, again, really hard to tip against Arsenal.
Yeah, big win for the Gunners.
Yeah. And the round finishes with Tottenham taking on Crystal Palace. Aussie Ange trying to get back into that top 4. Home game against Crystal Palace. They would feel they should be winning that game, surely. I mean, Crystal Palace, not a game that they can't see themselves winning, but I mean, if Tottenham's serious about Champions League football, this is a game Manchester win.
Yeah, I think that Spurs are going to win this game. I think they've still got a game in hand as well, playing against Chelsea. Of course, they didn't play last week due to Chelsea's Carabao Cup commitments.
Yep.
So they've had a bit of extra time to rest, and I think that Tottenham are going to be too strong and they're going to come away with a win. Even though Palace, buoyed by the new manager with Oliver Glasner getting a first win in charge, I think going on the road, taking on a team like Tottenham, I think it's going to be a step too far for them to come away with a win.
Yeah, I've tipped a Tottenham win there as well. So that wraps up the kickoff for this week. Make sure you check out My Betting Mate for the weekly Premier League Pulse and A-League Alert column. Thanks, Nick, for joining me.
Thank you very much.
And we'll see you here next week.